Greg, could you give us a very brief insight into the book?
Well, again, I'm going to go to the subtitle, and the subtitle is The Search for Balance in an Age of Spin. And it is, I suppose, a quest to sort out the wheat from the chaff. And I've chosen to do that by examining the Ten Commandments again in the context of today. I find it extraordinary just how much ancient wisdom is still relevant today. But like everything, it needs re-examining. I mean, we don't use the same medical practices as we did even 200 or 300 years ago. But we're using the same emotional and spiritual diagnoses that they were using several millennia ago. That doesn't mean to say that those tenets by themselves are necessarily bad, but it certainly does, I think, require of us that we start examining them and start looking at them from a perspective of living in the 21st century as opposed to whatever century it was before Christ. I think the Ten Commandments are an extraordinarily brilliant, succinct constitution. But I think that their application needs to be understood in a slightly different way. In other words, if you see, as we are talking about so much of the Old Testament, unless you are a fundamentalist Baptist, Southern Baptist in the United States, most of us accept that a lot of the Old Testament is metaphor. And I think that can be extended as well to the Ten Commandments, and by extension, therefore, to the entire set of ethics which control the way that we live our lives. In the United States, I also understand that in each courthouse there is a copy of the Ten Commandments. Written somewhere very prominent.
All right.
And I have no objection to that at all. I think that's in fact rather good. But I think it behooves us to look at those 10 suggestions, not as being something that belongs to a previous era, but as something which belongs to us, but therefore that is not to be taken too literally. It's what the underlining, the subtext is what writers would call it. It's the subtext of the Ten Commandments which is important, not the text.
What I find interesting there, Greg, is when you spoke of them, you said the 10 suggestions, not commandments. Do you think that the word commandments in itself can be an issue?
Society coheres far more readily, far more easily by consensus than it does by coercion. That's why it's important that we start having more principles and less laws. The tendency at the moment is to do exactly the opposite. We're having governments which are becoming increasingly coercive, and we are allowing principles to be abandoned. And it's entirely the wrong way around, and it is one of the reasons that we're in the situation, and so many of the situations today. I find it interesting. The Buddhists, for instance, as I understand it, have suggestions. They don't have edicts.
Right.
It's just say that if you do this, your life is going to be happier, more fulfilled. And we suggest, therefore, that you do it. They also have a very important part of Buddhist credo that the thought is as important as the deed. The thought that informs the deed is as important as the deed itself. In fact, very often much more important.
Greg, we know that God of the New Millennium is the second in a trilogy. When you wrote the first, was God of the New Millennium already in your mind at that point? It started developing as I was writing it.
Right. I was writing the prophet, so God was starting to develop in my mind, and so indeed was man, which is the third of the trilogy. When I first started writing the prophet, it was as a one-off, but then I realized that it led to other questions. The prophet itself led to other questions needing to be asked and needing for me to answer them for myself. What I'd never seek to do is to answer them for anybody else.
Absolutely, yeah, sure. Did you find the God of the New Millennium easier to write because you got into the thought process through writing the Prophet of the New Millennium?
No. is the short answer to that. Each book that I have written, I have come across a new set of difficulties and hurdles that have had to be overcome.
Sure.
And they haven't been consistent. With some of them, it was the actual device of the book. In other words, who the storyteller was going to be, and how we were going to get how that storyteller was going to tell the story.
Sure.
Others, some others, like The Prophet, it was almost dictated to because I had the template of Hebrand's original.
Right. Yeah.
So the biggest thing for me with God was actually trying to find the right voice, the right device, which makes it seem terribly artificial, and I hope it isn't artificial. But the problem with my previous drafts was that they were very artificial.
Right,
the story on which I chose to hang it was contrived and didn't ring true. I think that what is there now does ring true, and well, of course, it's contrived to the extent that it's made up in my head, but it doesn't, I hope, read like as such.
No, it certainly doesn't. I've read the book, and it certainly does not at all. Is it intended for a particular readership?
Well, it's for anyone who cares, and it's that simple, really. There is a huge body of people out there like me who believe in the goodness of man and who want a future for man and who are desperately concerned about the turns and twists that the world is taking at the moment.
Yeah, sure.
Who are sort of wringing their hands in despair about what can be done. Well, one of the things that can be done is that we can start getting together. We can start by sharing our common despair, and insisting that things start changing. And I think one way that we can do that is by agreeing to around basic tenets, which such as I describe in God. Now, that's not to say that those are the only tenets around which we can agree, nor maybe even that those are the best ones, but at least it is a way of getting a debate started, and a real debate, not a pretend debate, not the spin that we are confronted with daily on television, which is a choice between the devil and the deep blue sea, or a non-choice that we're being asked to make all the time. We are not going to spin our way out of the problems that we have got. We are only going to get out of the problems that we got if we start addressing them, and addressing them seriously. Now that means, of course, that we have to agree that we're going to disagree about certain things. That's fine. That's fine. That's very healthy. Disagreeing with other people is extremely healthy. But we need to actually start framing the right questions so that we can disagree about what are the important issues, not about the trivial issues.